Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Anthony Palladino. Anthony is currently Chief Revenue Officer at Mabel, and no doubt has some very interesting stories and perspectives to share. So, Anthony, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can get a flavor of your negotiation experience and also when you realized how important negotiations were. So we're super excited to have you on today, and take it away, sir.
Yeah, great to have you. Great to be here with you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Anthony Palladino, and I'm CRO currently at Mabel. We're a test automation software company based up in Boston. Having a lot of fun in that role. I also am a managing director for a small venture capital firm we created called Via Ventures. So I've got a perspective as an operator in SaaS as well as an investor in SaaS. I've done a bunch of advisory work. I've been in software, various types of software companies for 20 some years. So it's great to be here talking with you today, Matt.
Yeah, we really are happy to have you. And with all that experience, is it safe to say that through the years you've been in hundreds, maybe thousands of negotiations? Is that accurate?
Yeah, quite a few. I was trying to think about how much actual business my teams and I did over the years, and it's a lot of transactions, but it's been a lot of fun. Everyone is different, but there's a lot of methodology that's the same approaching any of them.
Yeah. Well, as I had mentioned to Anthony before as well, one of my favorite parts about talking with him, we had talked one time previously, is his fish tank in the back. I think I want one of those for my own office, and so it's very soothing and calming. So if the listeners see me just gazing off as this goes on, it's because I'm looking at his fish tank. So
there you go. It's a bad background for sure.
Yeah.
The virtual doesn't work with the shape of my dome.
Yeah.
The background gets totally thrown off through Zoom. I'm okay with it. It is a fact. It's part of life. So fortunately, I have one that's not too bad to look at back there.
You had an excuse. You had to get it because the virtual didn't work for you. Got it.
That was part of my negotiation with my wife on why I did it. So, that was one negotiation that I was able to be successful. It only took me 4 years, but I got there. So.
Well, we will talk about some of the differences between the personal or smaller negotiations versus the big ones. I have got a question about that later. So, diving first into, call it the emotions of negotiations. People might think that there can be a lot of fear involved in the world of negotiations. Where do you think some of that fear comes from? In any way that you want to take that, where does it come from? How do people get over it? What role does it play?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. And I think there are a couple of things that generate that fear in potentially negotiating. And one of the first ones, I think, is what I'll call simply a lack of preparedness.
Yep.
And when I say that, what I'm really talking about is doing the analysis of what the offer is. So if you're looking at a certain list price on something and there's an analysis, a detail you could do, the customer's asking for X, you're currently at Y, you've got some ability to do something more in there, you need to do that analysis. And I think that analysis will help you to go into the meeting with some good understanding of what the parameters really will be. So like
those guardrails.
Yeah, that leads into the second. But before we even get there, like when we're going into a negotiation, I go to Google Sheets, I go to Excel, we plot it out, we plan it, and we try to anticipate the objections. We try to anticipate what the customer may be asking for, what our parameters might be. Because ultimately in the negotiation, you want to get something that's fair for both parties. And I like to think about a negotiation where you're walking away and, I'd rather give a little bit more than maybe we wanted to, but it's still fair. And I'd rather have the customer feel that they're in a great spot. They got a great transaction. They feel really good about it. Because in my opinion, that goodwill helps. But you have to be prepared going into that analysis, going into that conversation with having done the analysis and anticipating where all the questions might be and the math. I remember we were in a conversation one time with a Fortune, I think they're probably 50 company.
Wow.
And we had a VP on the phone. Our champion was actually one of the VP's people. And, and then there was a procurement person on the phone. And the procurement person was pretty aggressive, but she was trying to hit on some negotiation points and discounts. And I said, yeah, here's what we already built in for you. It's at this percentage. And if you think about that, it goes to this percentage. And we've already given you best in class. So we'd already done the math and we spent a couple of hours anticipating that. The conversation just got shut down because we were a couple steps ahead. We were fully prepared. So I think that's one of the most critical factors to start. I'll keep going on a couple more.
Please do. Yes, sir. I want to hear all your thoughts.
I think the other piece is really having a lack of an understanding of what the walkaway point can be. So if you're going into a negotiation and you know where you can ultimately get to, then you have a confidence to say, okay, here's where we are. We can go down to this, or we can go to this, and you know where that final point is in the transaction is that you're willing to accept. If you know what that is, the worst case scenario is the customer is asking to do something that you can't accept, and that's not fair. It's not fair for the business. It's not good or healthy business. And that's the point where you say, hey, I know what that walkaway is. When you know what that is, you don't have to fear the negotiation. You know, as bad as where the worst case scenario, and you know you want to try to avoid that. But if you get there, then that's the point at which you're saying, hey, I can't help you. You know, so that gives you just confidence to know here's what my parameters are. Here are the guardrails. You know, you have to be mindful about that, and the team has to get on the same page on that. And I think a third thing that really, especially the larger the transaction or the more people are involved, is a lack of scenario planning.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do scenario planning, then you get into uncharted waters. When you get into uncharted waters, it's alarming. What am I going to do? But if you think about if the objection becomes A or the objection is B, or a person in the conversation really takes a super aggressive approach and starts emotionally trying to jab you, you have to be prepared about who the people are on the call and what role each person will take. So in that case, then you know if it goes this way, Joe jumps in. If it goes this way, Sarah's got it. If it goes this way, I'll take it, whatever the case might be. But that's all scenario planning. And it's kind of one of those things you spend 2 or 3 times as much time, maybe 4 times, planning for a really sophisticated negotiation than you actually do in the negotiation, right? So that scenario planning, it's a whole different level of preparation, and it's a whole different level of getting the team on the same page. And usually my approach to scenario planning is not only putting it in Excel where you're doing doing the models, you're doing the analysis, you're doing all the comparison points, but you built out an if this, then that, and who will run it, what's the play, if this, then that, and it can get really detailed. You know, we've done this before. You have multiple pages of scenario planning, and that means you also have to prepare well as a team. You know, so those are 3 things, and there's one more too, Matt. I don't know if you have any comments on the first.
Well, the only thing I wanted to say so far is that all this is resonating perfectly. I mean, so much of it to talk about removing those aspects of fear come from the preparation and the planning. And so to have such an emphasis on that, I think in our podcast, we're constantly hearing that threaded throughout as a really core component of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, fear is just a lack of planning at the end of the day. Right. And the fourth thing for me is a lack of defensibility. And defensibility has a number of different components because there are several things that are implicit in defensibility. And defensibility is being able to say why this is a fair transaction, why you need to be able to stick to this, or what's the best offer that you can do. And that implies a couple of things. A, you've got an ROI model. And the ROI is not particular to what the vendor thinks or what the supplier thinks, but it's the ROI from the customer's perspective. So there's a whole level of work that has to go into that to make sure that's specific to the customer, because the value needs to be here, the cost needs to be here. If the value's here, the cost can be there. If the value's here, the cost has to be commensurate. That's what I call the value and cost quotient. you know.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to be able to be defensible about the transaction itself. And in order to be defensible, you need an ROI. In order to have if you have an ROI, the ROI is only as good as the champion who's going to sign up for it. I learned this lesson. I learned it a couple of times, but I learned it earlier in my career, and I continue to learn it a couple of times because, sometimes the thick heads like mine take a while to get it through. I remember having a transaction. It was like a $4 million ROI, and the cost itself was like $400,000. And I was puzzled as to why I couldn't get this deal through. And the reality was I didn't have a champion who could sign up for it, because the value and cost quotient only matters if someone's going to go fight for it. And that person needs to have a defensible position to say why this is a transaction we want to do, why we want to do it. So that defensibility is the ROI. It's the champion who's there. And it's the really good understanding of why this is the right thing to be solving for the customer at this time. What is their problem statement? And if you have those things together, you can bring up the ROI, and you can bring up the fact that maybe you have multiple champions, which is better than one. Champion's a person with political respect and or technical authority who fights for us when we're not there. But you have multiple angles to be defensible so that the customer can say, hey, I want to get the best deal I can, but this is fair. Like, this is a legitimate thing. There is a really strong business case. And I don't want to negotiate so hard with the vendor that I'm making them weak, because you're defensible. You're saying, hey, this is the reality of this environment. And if you have multiple champions, then you can have that be defensible. But if you're missing the preparedness, you don't have the walkaway points, if you don't have the scenarios already planned out, and you don't know who's going to be defensible with you, and you don't have a defensible argument, it's scary as shit. Oh my gosh, how can you go into a negotiation, right? You're going to get killed. You're going to get frustrated because the customer asks for something that isn't fair and you can't articulate it, or you can't arrive at good terms from both sides, and the customer's just going to, they may go at you. Some people have different negotiation approaches. Some customers just want a fair deal, and some customers will push and push and push until you say no 4 times, So, but you have to be prepared in any of those scenarios, because you don't know. You can't choose your customers. You can only choose how you're going to react to them,
I love how you talked about not only the preparedness, but also creating the mock outcomes, right? If X happens, we're going to do Y. What comes to mind when I hear that is almost like these are all interconnected, though. And so I like how you're planning out multiple steps. In the same way when somebody does the NCAA tournament brackets, right? If one of your seed loses, what happens to the other 30 games? Like, everything changes.
Yeah.
And so I love hearing that thought process of, we want to plan out as many scenarios as we can so we know what play we're going to run when X happens. The one thing I heard there that I loved, Anthony, that you really called it out, and I have not heard anybody say that before, but it makes complete sense, which is the defensibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to be prepared to articulate and justify the reasons why you are negotiating for the things that you are, and how they have value to you. Like, what's that ROI, right? I mean, is that generally what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, today too, in the past 2.5 years, the expectations on spending have changed quite a bit, right? So,
sure.
You always have economic buyers. An economic buyer is the person with discretionary use of funds in India. Today, we actually just redesigned our sales process, and I don't even call out economic buyer in the later stage. I call out CFO/CEO finalization. And that's because I know with certainty that any transaction is going to have to go to the CFO or maybe the CEO. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of who's the EB. I know who the EB is. And there may be a couple of exceptions here and there, but part of the reason for that, you've got macroeconomic situation happening. You've got finance saying we're going to cut spending, and then you've got a whole level of discretionary spending that just went out the window. People don't have an ability to execute based on, and I'm talking largely the software environment, and differences in other technologies or other types of sales and services. But people don't have an ability to say, I've got a $10 million budget, I can spend up to $200,000 with nobody asking. That doesn't happen. It's
gone.
Yeah, it's gone. It's been gone, right?
Yep.
And the reality is, sometimes transactions have still taken place and you didn't know, but where it had to go. but it used to be a certain dollar has the economic buyer changes based on the dollar threshold. Today, the expectation is the CFO or CEO is the economic buyer for almost any deal, regardless if it's a fortune company or if it's a startup. So it's really, really important to know, to expect it to go that way and to plan it.
All the more reason why you're right. You want to get into that pre-planning, because if we're going that route, you're for sure going to want to have all of your numbers and facts and figures really buttoned up.
For sure. And the other thing too, Matt, you didn't mention this, but it comes to mind for me around when negotiation starts and the kind of preconceived expectations around that. And I think that I don't really think of the negotiation itself starting at a certain point in the sales cycle or not. I think about the conversation that we're having as a supplier or hopefully as a partner to the company. And that starts in the first dialogue. That starts in the way that you're communicating, because you want to be in a situation where the customer can have a dialogue with you where they're looking at you as someone who's a good provider, can be a really strong partner. So then your dialogue is on the same level. You're not customer and I'm speaking down to you as a vendor. That hurts the relationship when you go forward, and it hurts in a negotiation. And you can win deals that way but it's not a healthy relationship, and it makes for a very, very tough financial discussion at the tail end of the negotiation. But it makes for a tougher conversation too, as providing support for them and the customer service or customer support organization, because they're looking at you as task people and just do what I say. And our job as a customer service org is not to just give them what they want. And I'm not suggesting that you negotiate. Our job is to say, this is why you're looking to do this initiative. Here's the technology. Here's what you need to be successful. And I need to hold you accountable to that. But if you don't have a good, respected, reciprocal adult to adult relationship, you're never going to be in a spot where you can really enhance the value and drive the transaction, drive the impact of that ROI and of why the person has the problem statement to begin with. So that the negotiation at the tail end of the cycle, where you're really talking about numbers, is really a function of what you started in the first meeting and the dialogue that you're creating. And implicit in that is being well prepared in that conversation and being able to show up, drive compelled energy, and be able to show up and build credibility with your audience, because you're not going to build champions unless you have credibility. You're not going to have credibility unless you know your own product and you know their environment, and you can bring the two together. So like, it's a subconscious thing associated with negotiation that shows up later, but it starts literally in the first meeting, in the first conversation that you have, in the first 5 minutes of that first conversation. So
yeah, we talk about that a lot, and you're 1,000% correct for calling it out, which is that people think about it. Negotiation starts when, okay, we're both entering the negotiation stage, right? We're both going to get on the Zoom or get in the room, and we're going to negotiate out all of our points and gives and gets, etc. But the reality of it is that negotiation starts, like you said, Anthony, in the very first phone call, the very first interaction, because in a negotiation, it's about the relationship. And in order to understand what the other people value, you have to have that trust so that they'll tell you what's important to them. Like you said, your champion, right? Your champion wants to be able to walk away with a win to go tell their boss. And so how do we get them that win?
Champions, right?
Yep.
Back to the ROI and the value quotient, and today too, not only does the CFO or CEO need to be the economic buyer, but people are accountable to the spend, because most of the business is largely subscription, and we do a lot of multi-year deals, and the customer is taking a little bit longer view of it. But even so, there's an expectation within the customer that by day 90, by day 120, there's a report back from the person who funded it to say, are we on track? Are we off track? And that accountability on the customer side to drive value for the investment is really critical. And you have a good negotiation, you have a good dialogue, you put a good ROI together. The focus we have is really around helping the customer to overachieve against solving the problem statement that they have. And our approach as a solution is just to make sure we're helping them to do that and aligning specifically to that. Because I know that they're going to be accountable. If it's a 1-year transaction, it has to have an ROI. You have to have a value realization after that first year, because finance is going to say, we spent X dollars on this. Did we get a return? Yes or no? And there may be an anecdotal story, or there could be a hard, we spent 100 and we got 300 back. Beautiful. But in any case, the champion still needs to be able to sign up for that. So this negotiation concept is just a thread that starts from the first meeting. It doesn't end at the contract execution. It continues throughout the life cycle of the conversation, and it's not a win lose or someone got the better of it. It's just a matter of the dialogue and relationship that you can create. Because it all comes back to value and cost. And is it a good story? Value is this big, the cost can be that big. It's all relative. It's always relative. It's always contextual. It's always temporal.
Yeah, and to your point is that in a proper negotiation, unlike what people sometimes have a belief about, I mean, both parties, if they're communicating well, as Anthony pointed out, both parties can walk away from a negotiation getting some or all of the things that they value, because we all have different values assigned to things, right? So in theory, it's completely possible that everything that I have, you could value more than me, and vice versa. So if I gave you everything I had, you gave me everything you had, we both have exactly what we want in a perfect world. But to Anthony's point, this is really about collaboration and establishing those hard numbers and ROIs.
Yeah, and I think the negotiation, there are multiple negotiations in any cycle, right? The negotiations are around, what is the process through which we'll take a look at this technology? What's the process through which we'll get other people involved? What's the process through which we will scope it? We will implement it. Maybe we'll trial it. What's the process through which? But any one of those things is not I'm the customer, you're the vendor, please do it. As a solution provider, you're bringing in best practices, domain knowledge, domain expertise, and you need to be able to have a good dialogue with the customer and say, hey, let me share with you what we're seeing. Let me share with you what we see as best practice. Here's a process that I think will yield the best way to evaluate this technology to put us both in a good spot. Because as a vendor, I don't do well if you buy the product, but you didn't really fully vet that it matches your needs, because maybe you get the deal done, but in a year from now, if it's not providing great value, then you're on the hook for that. We have a customer returns, but you're on the hook. So that negotiation about what you do in each step happens. But if you establish a really good dialogue and come to the meeting with credibility, come to the first dialogue driving compelled energy, then it's not an unnatural negotiation. It's just a good dialogue where you're aligning on steps throughout. And the culmination of that is aligning on what a fair and good deal is, so you can meet their needs and you understand the variables. So we can talk a little more about solving for structure too. But I think it's a mentality approach, and it's not an antagonistic one. Sometimes it gets a little contentious, but it's not by default. It only gets that way if as a vendor we failed in establishing a good approach up front.
In listening to you talk, it's very clear that you have a analytical view of it, which I really appreciate. You really want to break it, which is, by the way, a hallmark of a lot of very successful negotiators, is that you speak about it from a sense of a lot of data driven. And so I want to hear your perspectives on a couple schools of thought here related to both art and science, right?
Yeah.
Some people are very heavy on the science, very heavy on the art, or 50-50. Where do you, Anthony, generally fall on that? If we talk about not only the preparation, but the entire negotiation, right? As you pointed out, it's an entire life cycle of the deal, right? The negotiation is the beginning, but it's all throughout. Where do you find that balance of art and science?
I think it's a really, really great topic, and I'll probably recast it a little bit for you.
Yes, sir. Please do.
The way I think about it, the science piece is in two components. One is the methodology, and two is actual human behavior. And the second piece of the art is the way that you're engaging with your natural energy in that methodology with those natural human behavior characteristics and tendencies. So the science is, the art of it is really how you're enacting it and how you are representing it as in your own best natural energy.
Mm-hmm.
Big fan of showing up in the best version as the best version. As a leadership team, it's our job to always help our people to become the best version of who they are. But I think about the methodology of what I shared with you earlier around the mindset around going into the dialogue and establishing champions and making sure you're understanding what the customer's about and being able to build out the ROI. Those are all methodology things, right? That's a way of thinking about how to execute against a process, as you mentioned. That's the science of it. You can quantify that methodology, you can qualify the methodology, you can put that process in place. Now, the other piece of the science is in understanding who you're dealing with and understanding human behavior on it, right? And understanding roles and understanding people and tendencies. Just a quick example, there's the old adage of people buy with emotion and justify with logic. We talk a lot about this, and I don't know if it's 100% true. I don't know if people buy with emotion and justify with logic, or they buy with logic and justify with, they buy with emotion, justify with logic, or buy with logic, justify with emotion. But I know that both need to be there. So the science, emotionally and logically, the audience needs to be committed. That's actually the definition of what I call compelled energy, where the engagement, emotional and logical, of the audience to take action in a priority, specific, outcome-focused way. Like, that's a definition of me. But that science, that I know that both of those things need to be there. I know emotion and I know logic need to be there. So when you're approaching a negotiation, will the person first be emotional in that, hey, I met you, I like you, you show up in the right way, I'm resonating with your energy? Or will they be strictly about the math? Hey, functionally, technically, we fit or not, and because of that, then emotionally, I'm going to be okay with you. That's the science. I know that people need both of them. The art piece is how you can actually engage with your audience to make sure that they're covering both of them. Which comes first? An engineering mind, very logical, very logical, very logical. Then you get to the emotional because the logic is there. Someone who's much more, intuitive and relational based, they're going to be all emotional, and then the logic you build up there. So that's the science of it. But the art piece is how you're actually engaging in a way to help your customer, help your audience to feel both logically and emotionally aligned with you. So I think it is absolutely an art in how you can show up in your best way and know yourself in that. But it's also a science in that there is a methodology, and there's definitive factors about how people buy, how people think, how people come to conclusions. So,
yeah, and it sounds like you're actually using a little bit of the, part of that art form is applying the science. Am I understanding you correctly? I think sometimes people think about the art form as more like, well, he moved his left eyebrow, so that shows weakness, right? But in reality, what you're describing, which I resonate with, is more of like the art is the proper application of the science in a creative type of way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you nailed it, Matt. I mean, I'm from New Jersey. I speak a certain way. I don't speak English. I speak Jersey. It's a little bit of a different dialect and language, so not everybody can even understand it. But I don't expect someone from California or from Texas, and that's a whole other world too. I love people from Texas, for anybody who's listening, so nothing negative there, but having some fun.
He already razzed me about Boston, just so everybody knows. But go ahead, Anthony.
Yes, of course. But I can't expect people from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, especially when you go into Europe or go into APAC. Culturally, it's so different, and not all the ways that I might engage or what might be natural to me is going to resonate with those audiences. So as the art of it is, as the person representing the company or as a team representing the company, you need to be able to show up in a way that helps you engage with that audience. You show up in your best way, but also being mindful of where they are. And, that's the real art. That's where you can become an artist in it. And, but it's very hard to be able to perfect, I think, anything that requires consistent execution and executing with parameters without having a methodology and a process around it. You have to put that framework in place, and then you go execute within that. And that's where it gets a lot of fun too, right? Because you can show up as yourself. I think that's a big thing with people, is making sure. And this was one of the things for me early in my career that I had to reconcile is how do I show up in an authentic way as a person, and also in my personal life, but then in my professional life too, and reconciling that. And if you can figure that out and you have a good methodology, you have a good approach and process, then you can have a lot of fun. And you're not working hard. You're executing. You're having fun. You're working on it naturally. So
I think, part of what I'm hearing when you say that too is that I think about my own personal life where people think about me as a little bit of a spontaneous guy. I mean, I just will randomly do a road trip or something. But what they don't know is I'm able to have that flexibility, to your point, Anthony, because everything in my life is set up in a process, right? So I have all these processes set up that give me the flexibility to be able to appear to be spontaneous, or in your example, the methodology, the preparation that allows you to use the art form to craft those all together.
yeah.
And speaking about some of that data that we would use coming in to have that art form, I want to jump just a little bit to AI for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously the disclaimer here is that all of our thoughts on AI right now could change in 5 minutes when we get off this podcast, right? But as we sit here today, how do you see AI either being a part of negotiations, a benefit, a detriment? What are your overall thoughts with AI related to negotiations?
Yeah, I'm involved in a couple different AI companies as an advisor and as an investor. So, and as Mabel, we have a number of different components we were doing with AI, and we're continuing to build out. So we built it into our workflow, and we built in ChatGPT and a bunch of different scenarios. So some really, really cool use cases there. I think that there's some things that AI can do in terms of a negotiation. Simple use cases like being able to compare contracts and get your patterns out of it. If you're on the customer side, you can use AI to really do some analysis of what you have, what's there, what you don't have. I think you can use AI in order to prepare for negotiations along that lines of doing the analysis as well as different scenario planning. I think you can use AI to learn more about companies and your research for them. I think that I don't see negotiations being run by an AI technology today. I think it can be used as an adjunct to do some scenario planning, do some research. And I think it's okay. I think you should anticipate that customers will use AI where and how they can, as much as they can. I mean, it's partially about data. It's partially about what the language models might be able to find out about things and create different ideas and strategies. So I think you need to plan that your customers are going to use it. As a vendor, you want to use it and embrace it, and it could be a super valuable thing, but I don't know that it will replace the concept. There are certain functions and roles and systems and processes that are being replaced by it, and that's a good thing, right? That's a great opportunity for savings. It's happening. It already has happened in a lot of different places, but I think it's really a matter of just embracing it and figuring out where and how you can use it in any and all discussions.
I love how you called it an adjunct, and you also used the word pattern. I mean, I think that really spoke to me. Like, that's gathering and parsing through huge amounts of data to look for patterns or themes, general themes or profiles. I really see some value for AI there. But to your point, I mean, I don't foresee a future anytime soon where there's one company is going to assign an AI bot to negotiate with another company's AI bot. I mean, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, right? What do you do there?
Yeah. I think, a lot of people bring up the concept of ethics in AI. I mean, I was on a panel a couple months ago about ethics in AI. AI itself is not unethical. You can have bad data that can return a bad return to drive something there, or you can write a bad model. But AI, it's the people who might be creating the model or the data that you're feeding into the model that can produce something unethical. But Is it ethical to be used in a conversation? Is it ethical to use it as research? Is it ethical to use it as a data source? Of course. I mean, it's an adjunct and additional and incremental way of understanding data patterns and research of publicly available information. So um, I think it's here to stay. And it's really the ethics around it is really all around the model, the people creating the models, and making sure that you're providing good data in it, so it's not biased. We'll learn from the data. That's where it's coming from. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I think you said it perfectly. Is that it's about what we're putting into it. I mean, we're getting, we meaning us as a species, we're getting out of it what we put into it, and so the ethics there are only about looking at the ways in which we input the data. The output is going to be what we put in. So I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to transition over to talk about for sure you got your hands in a lot of different things, investing and advising and all that stuff, which is why your feedback has been so valuable today. Looks like you have a lot of your focus now at Mabel. So I want to hear a little bit more about what Mabel does, what their value proposition is, pretty much why people should be picking up the phone at the end of this and giving you a call or some of your folks.
Sure. Yeah. And we're having a lot of fun in the market. We're in a great market. It's test automation. We're a platform for test automation. And when I say test automation, software test automation, we're doing multiple different types of testing. It's a process that historically has taken X amount of time with Y people, and we're able to compress that and improve 60, 70, 80% times. That it has a huge impact on cost. It has a huge impact on productivity. It has a huge impact on customer facing experience. Better quality software, better NPS, better customer satisfaction, better return. So we're having a lot of fun, and we've got a great team and a great group of investors. So
so to put it in the brain of I'm not very technically inclined. So am I understanding correctly, and please feel free to tell me differently, but that essentially if I'm a company and I have a new software product that I want to go to market with, what your team does is test that end to end to make sure that it's running as optimally as possible for a customer user experience. Am I close?
Yeah, you're right on. So any company who's developing software, and pretty much any company who has,
there's a couple of them,
any company that has customers and they're engaging with their customers digitally, they're doing it in software. So they're doing some type of custom development. So, it's pretty much any company, any industry today. What we do is it's a low code technology. It's a low code platform. So we enable you to create tests, to test the functionality, test the performance, test the APIs, test accessibility, even doing mobile testing we're coming out with as well. And we will enable you to make sure that experience that your end users have in that software is exactly as you intend it to. So we're working with Schwab, we're working with Priceline, we're working with some really, really ADP, some great shops, Toast, even if you're using your credit card much, we're going for what's happening with their the quality of their service effectively. So
amazing. Yeah. Well, I mean, when Anthony and I had spoken before and he was telling me about it, even as somebody who's not in that world of, technology building, that really resonated with me, because I was like, wow, if I had the opportunity to, for lack of a better term, do a dry run with this or submit it to a company who's going to have experts test it end to end to find its flaws, pressure test it, if you will, right? I mean, that sounded extremely valuable to me. So what you do and what Mabel represents seems to have a lot of value.
We think so. Yeah, we think so. It's a critical function of any company today, is how your users are engaging digitally and making sure that drives the experience that you want. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Again, this was Anthony Palladino, and he's with Mabel, and that's MABL, no E, MABL.com. So check him out. So, Anthony, thank you again. Any closing thoughts for us?
Thanks, Matt. It's great having you here, and great to be working with you guys at Maker Group.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Thank you, sir.